to expand a little bit on what you've said regarding Iran. Since 1979, they've been the epicenter of global terrorism. You talk about the Beirut bombing in 1983. They have had American blood on their hands for a very long time now, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's a Houthi rebels, whether it's Hamas, obviously, whether it's Islamic Jihad. But you also talked about in Iraq. That funding of terrorists in Iraq, that continues even through today, does it not?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you've heard reports that you could have, Iran has said they could act against Israel, and then so could other states in the Middle East, including Iraq. And so, look, as a veteran of that conflict, it's definitely it leaves a bad taste in my mouth to see that country is basically a satellite of the Iranians, and you have the Shia domination, and they've not been the type of partner that people envisioned back in the day. Another lesson learned with respect to national security. But yes, those Shia fighters, that was the reason why Qasem Soleimani was put out of his misery by the U.S. government. He had been directing attacks against Americans for years, and that was a justifiable response against him.
Yeah, I want to talk. You brought up the $6 billion. And that a lot of Republicans have been talking about. But as you said, as you implied, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that $6 billion is not what funded the operation, but oil revenues have been allowed over the past several years to continue to flow back into Iran. I'm wondering, you're running obviously against Donald Trump in the Republican primary. I'm wondering whether you think it was a mistake for President Trump to have waivers, the waivers that he pushed back in 2018 to allow China, to allow India, to allow Turkey, to allow South Korea, where the $6 billion came from. Whether it was a mistake for him to grant those waivers to Iran, because as he said at the time, he didn't want to basically upset the flow of oil and cause prices to go up. Was that a mistake?
Well, so first on the $6 billion, I do think that what Biden did was a mistake. I think doing that deal sent the wrong signal. I think the fact that Iran was expecting that money, yes, that money did not go fund this, but I do think money's fungible, and it gave them the ability to potentially shift money elsewhere. I would not relieve sanctions on Iran. I understand that there's a lot going on with energy markets. One of the things I've been talking about in this campaign is expanding domestic energy production here at home. We have the greatest gas resources, tremendous oil resources. I know that cuts against what the Biden administration is trying to do with the Green New Deal policies. But in terms of our national security, that benefits us at the expense of Russia, Iran, Venezuela, and China. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're having to make those decisions.
That waiver, right? Back in 2018, you wouldn't have supported a waiver.
I've always supported. I've always supported from the time I was a congressman now, the strongest possible turning of the screws on Iran and their energy. My view is anything that goes to that regime, they are not trying to make life better for the Iranian people. They are going to use that, and they are going to try to fund terrorism with it. And I think that that's a lesson. But I will also say this, Donald Trump's approach to Iran was stronger than his predecessors was, and it's been stronger than the Biden was. I think both Obama and Biden thought you could have a rapprochement with them. I don't think that that's possible.
The editorial board of the Israeli newspaper Haaretz noted in a piece titled "Netanyahu Bears Responsibility for the Israel-Gaza War." They said this: above all, the danger looming over Israel in recent years has been fully realized. The prime minister indicted in 3 corruption cases cannot look after state affairs. His national interest will necessarily be subordinate to extracting him from a possible conviction and jail time. And obviously, one of the largest newspapers in Israel says that his political battles may have distracted from his fight with Hamas. His personal battles may have done the same. Is that something that Republicans in the primary contest that you're having with former President Trump should be concerned about?
Well, first, with respect to Prime Minister Netanyahu, I was just out there in April, and I met with him. I found him to be very engaged on everything. Really was amazing, the knowledge he had about everything going on in the region, and that's a pretty left-wing paper. So I'm not sure that I buy that. I think that he has been engaged. Look, going forward as Republicans, my argument's been very simple. If the election is about Joe Biden's failures and our positive vision for the future, which it would be if I was the candidate, we will win. If it's about what piece of paper or document was left at the toilet at Mar-a-Lago or all these other things on January 6th, if that's what the election's about, then it's going to allow Biden to be in his basement, and they are going to be able to do it again. So just a question for Republicans about what do you want to be talking about?
You talk about a toilet, it's something being that really brings up an issue I wasn't going to bring up, but let me ask you really quickly because we're about to run out of time. Should Americans be concerned? Are you concerned by the fact that President Trump revealed war plans to invade Iran and military attacks against Iran to people that didn't have classified ability to see those documents?
Well, look, I think that's an allegation. It remains to be seen. Obviously, if it's proven, that'd be a different thing. But I would just note, and I think this is why a lot of Republicans are concerned about some of these cases, is that he was being attacked for years as being in collusion with Russia, and that was not accurate. That was a false narrative that was created, and right. So I'd be remiss if I just dove in and accepted all those things. I think he has his day innocent until proven guilty. But the reality is, we are dealing with this situation. And if the election's a referendum on all those other issues, if we're not talking about inflation and interest rates and the border and crime, then that gives the Democrats a huge advantage to try to retain power.
You're saying if the election's about Donald Trump instead of Joe Biden, then that is bad news for Republicans.
I think a referendum on Joe Biden means we win if I'm the candidate. I think a referendum on Donald Trump, if that's it, then I think the Democrats would win. Joe, there are millions of voters out there who don't like what Biden's doing, think the country's in the wrong direction, going in the wrong direction. They want to vote for a Republican. But once it's Donald Trump, that's just a deal breaker for them. They just won't do it. I saw a report, I think on your network, where someone said he was a Republican. He said it didn't matter. He would do Biden. That's just a reality that Republicans have to face up to if we want to win. And we saw these losses in the most recent elections, 2020, 2018. Let's give them America a chance for a fresh start. And I think that the results will be very positive for us.
All right, 2024 presidential candidate, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, thanks so much. Hope you'll come back and we can talk about all the other issues we didn't talk about today.
Thanks for coming on. And that